And it's very interesting for me to show you an extract of one here in Kyoto, because as you will see in the extract I show you, part of the techniques which are used are learned from bunraku puppetry. They are badly learned. Let me explain. If you are a devotee of bunraku, this will be a shock. It's not how it's meant to be. But it's one of the things we started to play with was the idea of several manipulators with one puppet. And then to work with the idea that the puppeteers, the manipulators, would be visible together with the puppet. And I know, or I think I know, that in the bunraku tradition, you have a master puppeteer who is visible, and the other secondary manipulators who have a cloth over their face. And what we started to discover was that, in fact, for the work we were doing, the double performance, the performance of the puppet and the performance of the person with the puppet, became kind of vital. And it became vital in the same way that when you're looking at this drawing of the face, you're doing two things. You're not pretending that is a face. You know you are looking at a drawing, but still something in you is prepared to see that as a face. In the same way, and in an important same way, I think that when you're looking at a puppet, on the one hand you know that it's just a carved piece of wood, but on the other you can't stop yourself from giving an agency, a life, to that piece of wood. And this double performance of looking at, it's a triple performance. I think it's the triple performance I'm interested in, or the triple activity. On the one hand, you look at the manipulator, the human operating the puppet. And the puppeteer's gaze is not at the audience, or should not be at the audience, but is at the puppet. He is moving, or she is moving. So you as the audience are doing two things. First you look at the manipulator, and from the manipulator you follow the manipulator's gaze to the object that is being moved. And the object that is being moved, the puppet, also directs its gaze back to you, the audience. And then what you do is you do a third thing. You think, all right, I know it's a puppeteer holding a piece of wood, but I can't stop myself also for believing in the action of this piece of wood. So you then sit behind yourself and you watch yourself watching the performance, thinking how strange it is that I'm allowing myself to be fooled, to be deceived into thinking that this piece of wood has a kind of life in it. And it's that pleasure of self-deception, which I think is very important in what we do when we go to the theater, when we watch any performance. And it's similar to the kind of the pleasure of self-deception when we say that is a face rather than that is simply a series of black lines on a sheet of paper. Let me just give you, we can keep it like that, a short introduction to know what it is that we are going to be watching. George Buchner, the German author, writes a play called Wozzeck in 1860, or maybe even 1830. It's the story of a private in the army who is mercilessly oppressed by his boss, who is a captain in the army. And in the end, he ends up killing his wife and drowning himself. But the section I'm going to show you is an early section in the play where Wozzeck is simply laying the table for the captain, and it's about his anxiety about performing well for his boss. So the boss isn't present, it's simply Wozzeck himself, the character, the single puppet that you see laying a table. And the production we did took the German play from the 19th century and set it in Johannesburg in a contemporary setting. So that gives you a sense of the kind of language that we were working with in that puppet production. This production was made in 1992, so it's been around and here for a long time. And then after working for some period of time on these puppet productions, I started working in some opera productions. In other words, working on the same principle initially, with both puppets and with singers, but working on the basis that in the same way that the puppet manipulators focused on the puppet and not on the audience, and the performance went through the manipulator to the puppet and out to the audience, I started trying to work with singers also, in which the singer, who would also be a puppet manipulator, would be singing not to the audience but to the puppet, and tried to convince the singers to have confidence in directing their performance to the puppet and from the puppet out to the audience. And so I did 2 puppet opera productions, and then started working simply with singers and projections in larger scale productions. So the other extract, I'll show you a fragment of it. I don't have a fragment from the production itself, but something that shows you some of the rehearsal process and elements of the production. And the piece I'll show you comes from a production of the opera by Dmitri Shostakovich called The Nose, which was an opera based on a short story by Nikolai Gogol, the great Russian author, also called The Nose. And it's the story of a man who wakes up one morning and finds that his nose has disappeared. And the different fragments from the extract I'll show you that come from that. But like the Buchner story, it's interesting that it's a 19th century story that is very important for 20th century modernism. Buchner's story, even though it was written in the 1830s or 1860s, I can never remember. In fact, it gets rarely seen in the 20th century, as does Gogol's short story through Shostakovich's opera.